My dad and I were actually really close. I was definitely a daddy's girl. I felt like we were always having these adventures out in the wild. All of a sudden, out of absolutely nowhere, I just got this crazy feeling. I didn't know exactly what had happened, but I knew that it was my dad. And I just shook my head and I said, no, no. In life, there are things that you will never anticipate, things that completely ruin the plan that you have for your life, things that you never, ever imagine. My dad was a very big outdoorsman. We were always camping and fishing and hunting and you name it. If it's outside, we were always out doing it. When I was in college, I really didn't see my dad that often. So we decided to actually go down to Lake Powell. We just spent the entire week houseboating and water skiing and wakeboarding, and we just had such an amazing time. A week after that trip ended, out of absolutely nowhere, I just got this crazy feeling. Basically, I just wanted to go home, and I didn't know why. So we went, we get out of the car. It was my aunt. And just the look in her eyes, and it was just such a deep sorrow. And I just shook my head and I said, no, no, no. My dad had been murdered. You're just overcome with anger and sadness and grief to a degree that you never knew before. As people were coming down the line at the funeral, telling me all of these things that, you know, your dad is in a better place, I just couldn't believe it, and I couldn't believe in heaven because it just seemed like such a fairy tale to me. It was something that you tell somebody to make them feel better. When my dad died, it really did change death in my eyes because people were telling me that he's in a better place, but I couldn't believe that. But I was really hoping to be able to see my dad again, to just have something, anything. I was just desperate for that. I desperately wanted my dad to come. When I thought about the man who murdered my dad, I honestly hated him. And when I saw his picture in the newspaper with any of the newspaper coverage, I literally shuddered. He was kind of like the villain in my mind. He wasn't even really human. And I never thought that I'd be able to forgive him. It had been about 9 years since my dad's murder. And I think it all just kind of came to a head, and I kind of just fell apart. I became very depressed, and I fell into a pretty deep, dark hole. My greatest fear at that time was that there was going to be something wrong with me, and I would die, and I would leave my children. I had some family members come up to me and say, "Lori, I think it's time to try some medication." And I remember just crying and saying, "Is it that obvious that I'm really not doing well?" I became very depressed, and I couldn't get myself out of it. I tried going to a therapist, I tried meditation, I tried doing yoga, I tried all sorts of different things, but nothing was working. My last resort was to call my girlfriend, Sarah, and I called her up and I said, "Sarah, can you tell me a little bit about your church?" And that next Sunday, I'm sitting there and the pastor started preaching on exactly what I was dealing with in that moment. I started going to a women's Bible study. I started pouring myself into it. I started reading scripture. And at one point, even though I still had some doubts, I was just like, what do I know to be true like deep down in my heart, and it was truly that Jesus is the Son of God. I gave my life to Christ and I said, yes, I do believe that Jesus is who he says he is. God was showing me step by step by step who I am and who God is. I started to see my own depravity. I started to see the depths of the sin within myself. And that is why Jesus had to die, because ultimately sin is what separates us from God, and Jesus had to come so that we can be forgiven. I had tried to forgive the man who murdered my dad. And then one day I was reading about Jesus dying on the cross. He was asking for God to forgive the people who were in the process of murdering him. And I understood in that moment that true forgiveness can only be done through God. I mean, it was so hard and so difficult, but I was able to forgive. Jesus has gone to prepare a home for us forever. It has given me such peace. And the thought of heaven is just overpowering at times, because it is a place where there will be no more fear, no more tears, no more sorrow, no more death.